Hello and welcome to the next episode of How to Build a Planet. I'm here today with Dean Curtis from RedX Data Services. I'm really looking forward to chatting with you today, Dean, as we explore this idea of how does a leader build a culture in different sorts of contexts. And really interested to chat to you today because you occupy a fairly sort of unique position within a much larger organization, and I know you look to kind of build your planet in that context. So I'd love to start off, just tell us a little bit about you and your journey to where you are now.
Well, first of all, Keith, thanks for having me. And I guess the first thing I should say is we've known each other quite a while, so I'm a little bit nervous about this interview and where you might take me. But I should probably preface that by saying everything I say is my own view and not that of the company. So we can just go wherever you like now.
Yeah, good.
But I guess if I looked at my journey, I probably still don't know what I want to do when I grow up.
Yeah,
it's a bit like one of those. Mm-hmm. And when I was younger, I played a lot of football, and that was my real big passion. And when I was 15, 16, 17, you kind of realise that that's not going to happen. Mm-hmm. And fortunately, I had some okay exam results that I could stand on and did my A-levels. And unfortunately, the people that were kind of responsible for me in sport at the time were pretty adamant about continuing to do your schoolwork as well, which was good. Cool. and helped me in hindsight, and I think everything turned out for the better, because I don't think I'd ever have been great in that world, or world class in that world, let's put it that way. And as I was looking at universities, I managed to get one of 3 A-level leaver places at Rothschild's. So I spent the first 2 years of my life travelling around Rothschild's Merchant Bank, which was just an unbelievable start.
Did you? I never knew that.
Yeah, and it was just phenomenal. I worked in private client treasury, asset management, the dealing room, and I'm a big fan now because of that experience of apprenticeships and things like that, because at 19 I knew a bank better than people that had worked in a bank 40 years because I'd been exposed to it. And as I subsequently moved into the world of sales and things, that served me really, really well. Moved from there to HSBC because I wanted to be a fund manager, so I managed private client fund money. I then took a break from that and went back into football as a coach. Lived in a couple of different places, Sydney, California, and then worked for a couple of Premier League teams, and then went back into banking, which I always said and thought I wouldn't do with Investec. And then kind of everything collides. There was a headhunter I knew. And at that time, the world of regulation in financial services was really increasing. And there was a reg tech startup down in Putney in 2004 that wanted someone in a sales organisation that was networked in the banks to evolve.
Oh, okay.
And I moved across into the world of sales and data, which is where I find myself today. And I think there were some passions in that journey. I've always been really, really interested in communication, and weirdly, even when I was trading, I preferred the selling and customer part of working people out. Sitting behind a load of screens and selling a bit of Shell and buying a bit of BP wasn't really fulfilling as meeting someone new and pitching for business, and so
it was always that human side that you were kind of drawn to.
Exactly that, yeah. Right. And I still am. In my role, I deal with a lot of problems, and when I get out and meet customers, I kind of remember why I breathe. And so that's still my underlying personal passion and drivers that come out through those things. And then in the data world, I did a number of different things. That reg tech startup did really well, ended up being sold to Thomson Reuters. I went to work at FTSE for a while, the index company, with my sales leader at the time. I began Wolters Kluwer's financial services international business. So I was their first non-US employee, grew that to 400 employees and about 40 million euros in revenue, and then started up the global account program across the whole of Thomson Reuters. Had a very short spell in private equity, and I've been with RELX almost 10 years now. I did the international expansion of their risk business, and now I lead their data services business, which is six data businesses that previously we were publish a magazine business called Read Business Information, now called Data Services.
Yeah.
And then I find myself sat in front of you again today.
And that's just, so I find that fascinating because it's such a wide range of experience. You've got so many elements in there. You've got sport, you've got banking, you've got private equity, you've got regs in there, you've got all sorts. How much of some of that early stuff has influenced how you go about building how you go about leading and building a culture in the organization that you run? How much of that is still sits with you and you call on from time to time as you build the culture?
Always, like, genuinely. And I think, being really honest, I think that my experiences outside of business have influenced me more than my experiences inside of business, and that in itself takes a bit of courage, right? Because I think naturally people in organizations look at their current leadership and feel they need to change to be like them, and I think that's absolutely the wrong thing to do. I think that you have to, well, first of all, I think the biggest journey anybody goes on before you know where you're going is to know who you are. And knowing who you are as a leader is really important, because you need consistent, or you don't need it. The people that you have the privilege of serving are the people that need consistency and clarity, and you can only get that if you truly know who you are.
Sure.
So I have my own set of values that I'm kind of, it's taken a long time to work them out, but I'm embedded in terms of how I lead. And I've done things that have been less conventional. I'm kind of a bit of a backstreet Essex boy. Didn't have the greatest start in life in UK terms, I suppose, but brilliant in terms of global terms.
Sure.
And that kind of gave me a helpful chip on my shoulder occasionally from work and other things. And so outside of work, particularly sport, has really shaped me as a leader, and I've been, I think, brave enough to use a lot of that. As you know, I'm working with PlanetK2 for a decade now. It's something that doesn't go away in my organization, and we can talk later about the benefits to that culturally. But and then when I talk to people about being a leader or developing their leadership style, I think the phrase I always use is be the leader you always wanted. And I've worked for some exceptional leaders that have made me probably better than I should be. And I've worked for some really terrible ones.
Yeah.
And you learn just as much off of both. And it's about creating that platform and opportunity for yourself to be able to use and stand by your opinions of those leaders and create your own recipe and mix of what the best leader is.
Yeah, so I'm keen to explore that and take that leadership, that variance in leadership stuff, because good leaders and rubbish leaders, and like you say, we all kind of we see someone do something good and think, well, I could do a version of that, and I might add that to sort of my kit bag, not in their way, but in my way. Where you see somebody do something awful, and you say, oh, I'm never doing that, but it was useful for me to witness what they did and the impact.
Yeah.
If we widen that out and think about that from a cultural perspective, given all those various sort of areas of your life that led you to where you are now, did that impact you on a sort of cultural level as well, when you saw private equity and banking and football, I mean, really very different cultures. Have you taken some of that as well as the personal leadership stuff, but seen actually the wider kind of ecosystem that a culture is, and has that formed part of who you are as a leader and how you go about creating a culture?
Absolutely. All of those things have created what I would call my recipe, if you like. But that whilst those environments are very different and the conditions may be different, I think the core factors of what good leadership and culture look like don't change.
Okay, and what are those for you?
I knew you were going to go there. So from a leadership perspective, I think authenticity is the number one, because I think in crises people see who you really are, and I've had, unfortunately, that opportunity with staff members passing away or offices catching on fire or whatever it is. People then see who you are.
Yeah.
So just be the best person of that. So authenticity is great. I think it's the hard bit is setting the standards. I think that's important, and where the standards are. You can sometimes put the bar too high, and the organization doesn't feel like it can get there. And sometimes the bar can be too low, and you kind of get a culture of mediocrity where people aren't driven and stretched and achieving their best. And that's just as dangerous. But there's a sweet spot in between, and I struggle with that sometimes. And then obviously role model, I think, is number 3, which is really, really important. And 4 and 5, I think, are probably the hardest. The best leaders I've had do 2 things. They make you feel really confident and great about yourself, but challenged at the same time. Like my boss now is phenomenal, a leader. He won't listen to this, so I'm not just saying that. But I always feel supported, empowered, have space, know I've got someone to give me guidance if I need it. But every time I'm in a room with him, almost like we're friends, my spine is slightly straight, and I'm worried about how he's judging me. And I think that's healthy to drive accountability in my own performance. And I think that balance, the best leaders always have.
And do you do that with the people that you lead as well? Are you keen that they have that? I'm going to sit up straight now and straighten my spine. Are you keen that they have that sense as well, as part of the kind of culture that you create, where there's a sense of being really valued, really supported for who they are, and at the same time your standards are really high? And that kind of tension, is that an important part of how you lead through the culture?
It's really important, and I think that some of the people that I've led would see different sides of that equation, and it changes. Over the last 5 years, there's a couple of people directly I've put under quite a good deal of pressure, actually, and they've really kind of come through that, would be their phrase of the experience, probably, and are so much better for it. And in a high performance environment like in sport, if you're not doing that to the talent, then you're doing them a disservice. Because my whole mission statement in life really is, how do I achieve my personal potential, and how do I help those around me achieve theirs if they choose to?
So you're creating an environment where they have the best chance of fulfilling their potential.
Absolutely.
And whether they choose to take advantage of that environment is clearly up to them. But what you do. And I'm interested in this authenticity bit, particularly in terms of culture. So I think about all the leaders that we work with, and there are times when they'll get up in the morning and they'll feel a bit rubbish, or stuff's going on at home or whatever, and then they get to work and they know they've got a key role in creating this environment and creating this planetary system, this ecosystem, but they're not feeling it. And at that point, I'm just curious about this kind of authenticity piece, because at that point, is it right that they don't want to be deeply authentic, because actually that's not going to be helpful for the people around them and the culture? Is there a version of authenticity, or is it always for you, actually, you're just going to see me how I am today?
There are occasions where I may change it, like if I'm not on it and I've been really tired and you're in deep crises, then the business needs and deserves a leader, right? So there are times when I will put my game face on and say, right, because that's when leadership is needed. But one of my personal values in life is you become the people you touch, and I surround myself with people that do motivate me. The 101, you asked, I don't think I answered the question about culture, but answered about leadership. But my number 1 is passion and belief. Life is really short.
It is.
And I want people in our organization to want to be there, to believe in the purpose of the organization and each other, because that's ultimately how they're going to thrive. And we all have those really terrible days, but that purpose is the thing that helps you on those days to really kind of engage and raise your game when you don't want to, as does the people around you. And some of the days that I've turned up like that, I've performed really, really well, actually. And there have been days where I've woke up and my exercise regime was good and I've had a healthy breakfast and I haven't quite been as good as I thought I was going to be. And so, I don't want my day to be determined by that initial feeling, because the environment that you create can lift us all for the good. And so for me, passion and belief is the number one. I don't want anybody to be part of anything I am, which really relates to the planet and the ecosystem and community. Community started by people coming together who believe similar things.
Sure.
And that's what it is. And whether that was for taxes, politically, culturally, geographically, it's how communities were formed. And
sure,
over the last few years, some of that stuff's just got mixed up a little bit.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably why we see some of the things we see in the world.
Yeah, I'm sure that's right. I'm just really fascinated by this. What I'm hearing is that you start to find out how powerful your culture is, and you start to find out the value of your culture when things are a bit tricky and is a bit shit, because it's relatively easy, I think, or easier, definitely, to maintain a vibrant, positive, how we want to frame it, culture when things are relatively straightforward and relatively easy. But you find out actually how important that is, and I'm guessing, and you tell me if I've got this wrong. Well, let me ask the question. To what extent is it an explicit part of your role to create a particular culture, or is it actually, it's not an explicit part of my role, but it's so ingrained in you as a leader, you feel it's so important that it's high up your priority list? I'm interested in the balance and blend between those two things.
And I think that changes too, right? So and I'm not getting away from the question, but I think the team and our employees and our everybody decides what the actual culture is, and I think that's really important. Right? But I think that I can clearly have one of the biggest influences over that. But I've seen a lot of leaders tell their staff what the culture is, but the culture isn't that.
Sure.
And I think there's an old phrase: as a leader, you get the culture you deserve.
Yeah.
And that's a good, and I actually think the best time to judge a leader is the spell just after they've left, actually, because then you see how embedded that culture is in the organization, and how people truly live and breathe it. And I haven't really answered your question there for a reason, but I do think at the moment that there needs to be, and I'm not talking about just our organization, actually, I'm talking about the world in general. I think there needs to be a parameter in most businesses where people opt into the culture again. And what I mean by that is I think that the workplace has changed so much over the last 4 or 5 years because of COVID, remote flexible working.
People's relationship with work has changed fundamentally.
Everything, right? And the world, there's this polarization of opinions. You're Republican and Democrat, Labour, Conservative, and even about vaccine and non-vaccine. There's so many things where the world is getting further apart.
Yeah.
There needs to be a case where you can create a position for people to lean in. And I think at the moment it's really, really important for leaders to do more than they've done in the past, where you influence culture softly and everyone. But you need to define what your culture needs to be so people can understand what they sign up for again.
And in that, again, there's a really interesting balance there, because partly it's about your success test, which was after you've left, to what extent is the culture being sustained, and at the same time this sense of, as a leader, you need to play you play a key role in establishing and shaping that culture, because I'm pretty sure that if it was not Dean Curtis in your role, but it was somebody else in your role, elements of that culture might, particularly as you're forming it, might be slightly different, because you're a different person with different experiences and different values and all that kind of stuff within the scope of a larger organization. We'll come on to that. So I guess I'm intrigued to just learn from you how much of it comes from you, and how do you this idea of creating a culture which unites people, so that isn't a divisive thing but brings people together. How have you gone about doing that? Is it something conscious for you? Is it something that just flows naturally for you, or is it something that's really conscious for you and saying, actually, this is the thing that we want to create, and we're going to be quite mindful and quite deliberate about the things that we accept and the things that we don't tolerate, etc. How much of that is deliberate, and how much of it is you kind of shaping it at a broader level and seeing how things unfold?
The shaping is deliberate. And what I mean by that is I think that everybody needs to be clear about the purpose of the organization and what it does. And that's the big thing that people sign up to, right? You need
So that's a
purpose.
non-negotiable, right? That's what you're signing
It's a
up for.
non-negotiable, but I don't write the purpose. So in the
Yeah.
business we've just been in, we did workshops, and that purpose then helps actually define our strategy, but it starts with the purpose, right? We did workshops all around the world, all staff surveys. The words of the purpose are not mine, they are those of the team. They're better at that than I am. What I believe a purpose should be is almost infinite and inspiring, and not really doable, but tangible, that everyone can connect to it. There's been famous examples of bad purposes. England Rugby World Cup will win the World Cup in 2003. 8-year journey. As soon as they won it, just everyone went flat. The team went to pieces. You look at the New Zealand one, is to be the best rugby team ever. They've won the Rugby World Cup twice, which, and obviously South Africa have just done that. But the way they framed their purpose was different. So I think the purpose is fundamental to everyone.
So and for you, what I'm hearing, Dean, is that purpose, for it to be really powerful, is more of a distant star on the horizon, as opposed to a shorter term thing where,
It's a North Star that in an empowered organisation, everyone can point to that. Is what I'm doing relating to our purpose and what we're trying to do for the markets we serve, our customers and our team, right?
And how do you keep that alive? So in the maelstrom of your daily life and everything that's going on, and you've got this North Star, and it's really important that people kind of connect to that, because that's the non-negotiable that they're signing up for. How, on a wet Wednesday afternoon, how do you keep that alive?
Well, you want people that are passionate about that, right? You have to, and that's why what you stand for an organisation is important, because the more people are connected to that, the more they believe in it, the better. And I'm fortunate because I think most of our employees almost got there before me, because we're a data business. There's a lot of subject matter expertise and passion about the markets and customers we serve. And then it became more about how do we make this visionary and inspirational and future-proof so that we can define the markets we serve and not necessarily react to them. And then underneath that is a set of behaviours. I call them behaviours over values, really. That and I just basically ask the team a simple question across thousands of staff. Say, what your teammates, what makes the best the very best? What do they do? How do they react or act? And that we come up with a list of values, and curiosity is a big one in our organisation, based on the intellect of the subject matter. Courage is key. Being part of a team and leaning into that. So the team come up with the values, and then you can really lead against those values. So when I turn up, I know that I need to live and breathe those, because it's what the team expect, and in return, I expect the same from them.
And so what does that look like? So if we get into a little bit of detail of that, so every organisation that you and I will know will have values, and they'll have created artifacts and wordsmithed it, and they'll all be there. I think you and I also know that there are some organisations where those values live and breathe a bit more, and there's some where they don't really live and breathe at all. And I suspect that's at least in part a function of leadership. And so what would somebody see you doing if I was to wander around in Dean Curtis's slipstream for a week or so? What would I notice in terms of how you lead through those artifacts like values and North Stars, etc.? What sort of things would I hear or see you doing?
First of all, really repeated language.
Okay.
And being boring. I mean, as leaders, you think you need to change the story all of the time, and you don't. It's just reinforce and reinforce. Staff are turning, over in our Arista, we have 11,000 staff. 2,000 of them have joined in the last 15 months.
Right.
They've never heard the story before. And so I think being consistent and repeating them is not a bad thing.
And so many leaders want to do something shiny and new. And actually that being boringly brilliant at some really basic stuff,
Yeah.
without swallowing the whole B section of the dictionary.
And it comes
feels
back to
important.
setting the standards, Keith, right? Is you reward for good examples of those behaviours, and at the same time you don't let bad examples go, because then everybody says it's okay.
And that's the hardest bit, isn't it? So it's the not walking past broken windows.
Exactly that.
Bit, right?
Exactly.
And is that something that you're very conscious of, and that you encourage your other leaders to make sure they're not walking past broken windows? Because in the end, like you said earlier, if this all ladders up to you personally, then it's more of a cult than a culture, right? Because when you go, it won't thrive. So it's part of your conversation with your leaders around how they keep the culture alive, and encouraging them not to walk past broken windows. Because my experience is reinforcing the good stuff is relatively easy.
Yeah.
It's addressing the stuff that you don't want to see that's a lot less comfortable.
Exactly, and I would say I think people don't reinforce the good stuff enough. You know, it's like, how do you catch people in, not catch people out?
Yeah.
So I do think that's under recognised. But on the harder stuff, I mean, we see even in the experiences and surveys that we give to our employees, the employees' engagement and experiences of their managers typically, generalistically, reduce as you go down the hierarchy of the organisation.
Yeah.
Because you obviously have newer managers that are learning, and that's where the difficult decisions don't happen. But if you want someone, and the bit that we have a performance culture, we all want to turn up and be better today than we were yesterday. That brings in tough times, an unbelievable amount of control to the individual.
Yeah, of course it does.
Right, I think that's really important. With everything going on in the world, and that has gone on in the world, we can control ourselves and our own culture, and create the culture in our organisation that we want to see on the world outside, that we are in control of that. And I think that helps people, that element of control, right? But deeper in the management, high performers want that feedback. You want to know how to get better. I've worked for a lot of leaders that, Dean's quite good, and I don't get the tough stuff. And that's really frustrating. Now, that said, when they tell me the tough stuff, I don't like it initially. None of us do.
No, we don't. Anyone that says they do is just not telling the truth. We all find that uncomfortable. Right?
Exactly. But in hindsight, it becomes an absolute gift. And as a high performer in the organisation, you just don't want everyone to tell you that you're great.
Yeah.
And I don't want the people that work for me. We've got many, many excellent world-class high performers. You know, they want to know how they get better, and so that balance between good and bad, or what do you do well, how do you do more of it, where can you improve, you know, how do we support that together, I think is how we get the best out of individuals and teams. And so, you know, I think that walking past a broken window is tough. You know, I see particularly, you know, world in sales managers where the same person delivers their forecast late every month or week, and they'll turn up to meetings and 5 minutes late, and the sales manager amiably will almost thank them for coming in. It's like, well, hold on a minute, just, you know, you're late again. You've got 15 people in the room that you're showing disrespect to. I'll update you in a minute. You know, go, you know, carry on. And it's those sorts of things that I think are important to drive accountability.
And do you encourage that in the leaders that you lead, to make sure that they are holding everyone responsible for those sorts of everyday behaviours that keep the standards on your planet high?
You have to, don't you? Because ultimately, macro, day to day, you know, you gravitate to the stuff that's easier. It's easier to give someone a pay rise and promote them than it is to do the opposite.
Yeah.
And so that's natural. But if you really think about the ecosystem and the culture and our planet, you're doing it a disservice if you don't do it. You're doing a high performer or any performer a disservice if you never tell them the thing that's kind of in your mind of where the improvement is.
Well, of course, because then the high performance culture withers.
Yeah.
Right? It loses its energy because it's not being reinforced. I think one of the things that's coming across really clearly to me is that this is an everyday behaviour around keeping the culture alive. It's not setting the culture. It's not getting everyone to buy into it and go, okay, we've done that.
Yeah.
It feels like quite hard work.
It's really hard work. So, you know, I have some certain personal things that might be to my detriment about culture. I think as a leader, people are always watching you.
Yes.
Even if I'm sat at home on my own in my home office, as I am more now than I used to be, I genuinely think people are reading into every word, and what does he really mean, and the phrases and the decisions I make, and all of that. You are always on show,
Yeah.
and therefore it is always, and it's the same for everybody. By the way, if you're talking about a proper inclusive culture, you can't just turn up one day a month and be inclusive. Let me try and understand my teammates today. You have to do it all of the time. Are you okay, Keith? Are you doing all right today? You know, we all have to work at it, which is why these good cultures aren't everywhere.
They're not everywhere, and they're not easy. So I'd love to understand from you. So, given all of this effort, right, it's discretionary effort, right?
Yeah.
And it's quite hard work, because sometimes you have to do these things and you'd rather not. You haven't got the energy to do it, but you know you've got to keep repeating it. You've got to keep linking and labeling back to the things that matter. And it might seem like an obvious question, but I'm really interested in hearing from you on this. Why does culture matter? Why is it worth the effort?
Because when you put the effort in, it all becomes smooth. It's like being in a winning team that doesn't get beat all the time. You sit in a dressing room and look around and you think you already know you've won today, and that's probably the only risk you've got. And the benefit of that is, you know, I love winning, and the teams I've led win, and that's important because everyone wants to be part of something successful. So success helps shape a culture.
Absolutely.
And when you get that, you know, we're creating thousands of jobs. People are being looked after. The environment is thriving. There's opportunity. The whole wheel of the ecosystem turns and starts to thrive, and the soil is fertile. Rather than when you don't put that effort in culturally. And I do believe it's purely culture the difference. It's not market conditions. It's not anything, right?
Yeah, well, they're the same for everyone, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And strategically, the strategy of your business is you can make sure your team is sitting at the right poker table, where that, you know, the wind can be on their back and you can be average and grow in a great market. But by focusing on culture and performance to outperform the market you're in, I think is really important. And that also becomes helpful in tough conditions like we see now. We haven't had a tough economy for 15 years. There's people in the workplace that have worked for nearly 15 years that have never experienced it. And unfortunately, you and I have experienced a few.
More than one, yeah.
and performance around that becomes more important. So I run a data aviation data business called Cirium. I don't run it. It's in my portfolio. And you know, after COVID, or when COVID happened, there were not many planes in the sky, and we track every plane in the sky.
Right, yeah.
And if that team had the outcome focus that a lot of businesses have, it would have been tough. But because we have a portfolio, we believed in the team, they have an excellent strategy, we continue to invest, we didn't need to cut or change anything. And what that does is enable you to continue on your path of growth. And they won more share in their market in a declining market because we served our customers. We actually helped our customers, in certain periods financially and other things, because, you know, we, one customer actually turned, a CEO of a customer, one of the big airline groups, turned up to a call unannounced and said, "I just want you to know that out of everyone we deal with, you're one of the only people to help us in this time, and it won't be forgotten." And you know, employees and customers remember how you made them feel during the tough times.
Of course they do.
And I think that's really, really important. But it's that incremental improvement. But you know, just to put that macroly in the world today, we're all becoming a little bit entitled, right? And with that gets outcome driven. You know, if I take that career journey, I've never had, I want to be this CEO, I want to run this size business or have this salary. All I can do is collect those experiences and see where it takes me, the journey that, you know, that I go on.
See how the novel unfolds.
Yeah, right? Exactly. And well, it's not even how the novel unfolds. I'm just trying to make sense of the notes I've made over the last 30 years. But I see performance like that, right? Where we can control trying to be the best version of us today and better than we were yesterday, individually and collectively. And we can control how we act and treat each other and how we respond to the opportunities and challenges in our market. And that's the same for any business, any community on the planet. And if you take the right approach to that, you'll differentiate. And, I'm doing a town hall on Tuesday, and my message to the staff is exactly that. It's been tough this year. It will be tough next year. This is when good cultures, talent, people differentiate themselves more.
So I'm hearing three things. I'm hearing that it's competitive advantage, that the culture is competitive advantage.
Absolutely.
I'm hearing that it's given everyone a sense of control and consistency in an inconsistent world. And from a performance perspective, I'm hearing that it's taking interference, it's taking noise out of the system. If we keep doing these things because it's part of our culture, then we have less noise to manage. Yeah. But the price to pay for that is we have to put in the effort every day.
Yes.
We can't just be a witness. I'm not getting the sense that your approach to culture has you wearing a high-vis jacket with innocent bystander written on the back of it. It requires everyday effort.
Of course,
right?
Yeah.
But the payoff are those really important things.
Oh,
and your judgment is, and you and I are on the same page with this. Your judgment is that discretionary effort for you and your leaders is crucial because of the long-term payoff.
It absolutely is, and in life and sport and whatever, you want to live in a thriving world where it's green and there's fresh running water, and that takes effort to care for it, and you need people that. This is the hardest thing, because everyone says, I believe the differentiator of all high-performing teams, communities, planets in any world, they have one thing above everything else, which is mutual accountability, where they treat the whole more than they treat themselves. That's very easy to say. You've seen more of this than me. Very few people on this planet have worked in one of those environments.
Yep.
And business is really tough for that. Like, sport is easy. I've sat in dressing rooms where I haven't particularly liked some of the people I play with, but in 90 minutes you're conditioned to win or lose, so you help each other.
Yep.
In business, you sit around boardroom tables and you think, they're a bit terrible, they'll be gone in a year. And the business environment is so much more antiseptic, right? And so that's one of the passionate reasons why I bring those experiences into the workplace, because everybody knows that sat around that table, and it's about what are our strengths and weaknesses, how are we vulnerable, do we put it all on the table, we've all got strengths and weaknesses, and how do we use the mix of those to do what we need to do to the best we can do. And I think that part of it is, to answer your question, we can control it. So I'm a big believer in the workplace. We spend so long on skills and processes. This is the mindset piece of it. It's pointless me as a business leader losing sleep over interest rates and the macro economy and what's happening in Ukraine.
Very little you can do about it, right?
There's nothing. So I need to know they're there, and I need to know the conditions exist. But what I can do is control what we can control and how we influence it. And culturally, we can control how we are with each other. We can control how we choose to perform. And really, all businesses are groups of people having conversations and making decisions, even manufacturing businesses, right? And the more effective those conversations, the better the business performs. And I think the trouble, particularly going back to that polarization in the world today, is people view conversations as winning and losing, and they're not. And I think that's where most leaders go wrong. It's not the autocratic world where you stand there and say, I want you all to do this, right? People won't follow that, and particularly willingly to their best. So you need to create an environment where, that opt-in and discretionary effort is high.
And that links to me. So you talked about this sense of entitlement earlier. And I've found over the years that the line between gratitude and entitlement is really fine and very porous. And it sounds like part of building a planet is to make sure that the tension between those two things is in the right place. And I'm interested to understand and this also links to this bit about the culture lasting beyond your tenure. How do you develop a climate where people in the business are citizens of the culture, not consumers of it? So not this sense of, right, well, Dean and Lisa are creating this culture and I can take advantage of it. But actually that accountability for, I'm a citizen of this place, I'm a citizen of this planet, and therefore it is my job, wherever I am in the organization, to contribute, nurture, sustain, protect the culture that we have. How do you make that happen? How do you create that oxygen?
So weirdly, we actually have a KPO in the business where each individual can do three things, right? Understand how their role affects the purpose, understand their role in contribution to the strategy, and understand the role that the value they bring to a customer.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because there's an old saying, right? If you sweep your front porch and keep it clean, you'll have a clean city.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's what we're losing in the world, right? Particularly even things around sustainability. You know, I'm really thirsty. It doesn't matter if I drink out of that plastic bottle because I'm thirsty, and there's 8 billion other people that would all do the same thing, so I'm not going to do my bit.
No single raindrop ever thought it was responsible for the flood.
Exactly, well, exactly that, right? And that's what it needs in connection, even in you know, in politics and things like taxes. Communities, you know, taxes came from people pooling their money for better spending. Now that system is so opaque, people can't make choices.
Yeah.
You know, if you didn't put your dishwasher on half a load and your washing machine, you could have street lights all through the night. Or, you know, there's not choices that people can understand. Mm-hmm. There's just a number.
Yeah.
And I think you've got to create the clarity of the choices and the performance people choose as part of the ecosystem. And I think most of us, unfortunately, are consumers of the planet now rather than citizens of. And that's a dangerous place to be, because nature will sort it out for us one day. And I'm not just talking about the planet and sustainability. I'm talking about, you know, socially and tensions and politically and all sorts of things. We all have an obligation to do that. And it's going to take some really strong leadership everywhere for that to happen. And I do believe that the best place for that to start is in the corporate world. Yeah. I think that the funding, the engagement, and the lack of trust in any type of political system, I think that as a leader in a corporate, we have an obligation actually to start to lead there.
Yeah, I think you and I have talked before that we both feel that business should be a force for good. Yes. Beyond its, you know, commercial imperatives. I completely get that. I'd love to understand, just at this point, a little more about how you create a culture within a larger organization. So I think that a number of leaders that I've worked with in the past who work in larger organizations, different in smaller ones, but in larger organizations where there's a bigger climate, yeah. And sometimes they have to create a microclimate in spite of the overall culture. Yeah. I know that's not in your case, but it's such an experienced leader. What would you be saying to a younger leader who wants to create a culture, wants to build a planet, but it's having to do so within a context of an organisation that is less than helpful? Yeah. What would your advice to them be?
It's a tough one, because if I looked for the environment, the planet that I want to live on myself, right? Yes. If I was interviewing for a job, I would look at what is the purpose of that organisation. Mm-hmm. What is the planet like? How sustainable is it?
Yeah.
And who are the other people that live on that planet, right? Who are the people you work with? And I'm in the organisation I'm in now because those things are ticked, right? Genuinely. Yes. We help solve some of the most important problems on the planet. We find missing children. We catch terrorists or help catch terrorists. We stop identity fraud. We make aviation more sustainable.
So the nature of your work is deeply meaningful at its essence.
Exactly. But then as a leader, I've chosen the environment because it's a long-term environment that
Yes.
allows me to do things right.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, my boss actually, when he interviewed me, said, Dean, we know what we've hired. Don't be a hero. Take a long-term view, 3 years plus. Now, what a privilege that is,
Yeah.
but also an obligation to deliver in that time frame. But it's beautiful. It's not every Thursday, what's your forecast? Of course, I'm ultimately judged on numbers,
Yeah.
and I have to forecast and
Sure.
get it right.
Yeah.
But that is such an unbelievable place to be in.
Real privilege.
And that was chosen.
Yes.
Right. And so making sure that the ecosystem you're part of is one you want to be part of, I think, is key. But then
let's say you're less lucky, and you know, for all sorts of reasons, you can't just leave your job or find somewhere else to go. Yeah. You're a passionate leader about creating a planet, but you're having to do so within your own internal culture that is less than helpful.
Yeah. It's to, first of all, you have to understand the environment and the context of what you're working in.
Yeah.
Because there is going to be parts to that are helpful,
mm-hmm.
and parts that are not. So
understanding those playing conditions we've talked about in the past, and figuring out that it's not all crap.
Yeah. And there's brilliant things like it. You know, I could do this as a startup, but you know, RELX, we have 36,000 people. We've got mm-hmm. offices all over the world. If I want to open an office in wherever, I can use the hiring entity for another part of the business. I got payroll. I can do those sorts of things.
Yes,
it's helpful.
Yeah,
right.
Sure.
There are sometimes things like processes and other things that mean that they are less helpful and slow me down.
Yeah. Yes.
Or processes I have to comply with that may not be optimal or suit where our particular part of the business is. And that's a trade-off, but you can't have one without the other, you know, and that's a choice that we all make. You know, if you're listening to this, the chances are you're in a pretty developed country and doing all right for yourself.
Indeed. Even
if you haven't kind of got a job at the moment, there's a lot of opportunity around. Not most of the world isn't like that. And we do have choices, and so choosing that part is important. But when you're in it, it's not all perfect, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's the point, and it's influencing the things you can influence, controlling the things you can control, and then understanding, but not letting the things you can't drag you down, and use the resources you have available to do the best you can do.
Yeah.
And
so, yeah.
And some people look at big corporates like, oh my God, how stifling! I get told what to do. I'm a cog in a wheel. Well, you can say, look at the vast talent, resources, expertise I've got to draw on, and reframe that as being a Disneyland of resources that help you do something amazing.
And we spoke about this a little earlier, that there's also this sense, I think, in larger organizations where the culture is perhaps less helpful in terms of the planet that you might want to build, is that if you are really consistent at delivering your results, then you get some space even within, and that space then enables you to do to create a microclimate without too much noise or interference, because actually in larger organizations they've got bigger problems to worry about.
Yes.
Right. So if someone's doing well, then you get a little more space and freedom to act and to create the planet that you might want to see. I think there's some of that in there, isn't there?
Of course, and ultimately that's trust, right? But one of the drivers in that corporate world of trust is financial results.
Sure. Yeah, that's your ticket to the game, right?
It is. It has a higher weighting than, you know. I don't trust one of my mates because they get paid more.
Yeah.
But in the workplace and leadership, that can be the case, and that they are the conditions. They are the conditions.
They are.
You know, I am a swimmer and I'm going to get wet.
Yeah.
To use PlanetK2 terminology, right? So you accept those, and it's pointless me worrying about those. But you know, and it takes courage, I think, to say kind of the score takes care of itself a little bit. If we deal with the culture and we deal with the purpose and the strategy, the results will be the outcome of that if we do it well. And my experience over my 30 years has been that has been the case.
But you got to be brave at times when the results aren't coming in, and you're still putting in the performance. And again, that reinforcement of those basics in those difficult times from a leadership perspective feels important.
It's when you need it the most, and it's that courage, which is another one of our values. Actually,
okay, is it
right? Yeah, it's when you have to be steadfast to what you stand for. I'll give you an example. I met the CEO, the old CEO of Heathrow Airport last week when he was talking about COVID for the airport. It's unbelievable, losing £8 million a day. They had to lose 25,000 staff.
Wow.
And now when travel came back, it's unbelievably hard to replace that talent. And I'm not just talking about bums on seats. I'm talking about the knowledge, the culture, the memory, that helps a business thrive. And that's why it's better to never go there, right? And in that case, there was no choice based on proper, conditions. But a lot of businesses can put themselves there, and knowing what you stand for and retaining those values and a steadfast of this is who we are helps you retain the ability to recover if you have any blips. And it also actually creates a level of confidence and consistency in people that actually helps you get out of the position you're in.
And as a leader, you have to help people be brave. And my experience is bravery generally means you feel a bit frightened first, because otherwise it's not bravery. So it's recognizing that you might feel a bit fearful, you might feel a bit anxious, and knowing that that's okay, and that's something that you have to lead through and help people feel brave, because in a corporate environment it's sometimes not very easy to be brave. And again, the leadership and the creation of the planet feels as though that's significant there.
And just on that, sorry to interrupt, but another big belief of mine is it's okay to feel those things, right? The world,
it's human.
Well, the world has told us, and it almost, it's worth saying, because we can't be stressed, we can't have pressure, we can't feel envy, we can't feel anger. We all feel that.
Of course we do.
And it's a skill in itself to know and accept when you're feeling it rather than run from it. And me and you and all of the team experience these things, and it's just kind of almost embracing it, and then knowing that you're in an environment where you can choose your response to those particular emotions.
Yeah, because running from them doesn't diminish them. No. It just increases them. They become more of a kind of ghost and a shadow that's behind you. It's facing into them and accepting them, and knowing that you're in an environment where actually it's perfectly natural and normal to feel those things, but it's what we do about those feelings that really matter. And that and that seems to be the essence of a in broadest terms, a high-performance planet, a high-perforance culture.
Because there's positive parts to all those emotions.
Of course,
right? Envy can be an
neither
unbelievable
good nor bad. They are
envy can be a brilliant motivator for people, right? There's things that I'm envious about you, Keith. You've got your own business. You know what you stand. That helps inspire me and make me better. There's
less me than meets the eye.
Love it. But honestly, they're positive parts of those negative emotions, and we are told that we have to almost run from them. There is a lot of helpful things about the right sort of stress, the right sort of challenge. And that's the thing about life, isn't it, right? You can't get success without failure. You can't get love without hurt. You can't get, and we've got to choose both sides of that equation. And I think the world we live in tells us we have to be one side of that. And I don't necessarily think that's healthy.
I think that's absolutely right. We're close to St Pancras, and I was mentioning earlier the work that we did years ago with Eurostar, and I had the privilege of working with Richard Brown, who was CEO and then chairman of Eurostar. And he always talked to me about, as a leader, and we talk about kind of creation of culture, and he'd always talk to me about running towards the sound of gunfire. Yeah, that's what you do as a leader, because not only for yourself, but also for the people that you're leading. You turn around and face the things that are concerning you, because that's the only way you can deal with them. Otherwise they're always there. Does size matter? So you've worked in lots of different organisations, a lot of them pretty sizable, but you've also worked in businesses and in sport where the organisation is smaller. Are are the challenges harder in a larger organisation, or are they just different when it comes to building a planet?
Depends what the challenges are. And let me give you an example. If you talk about culture, if you hire a bad person in a 10-person team, it has a huge impact, right?
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. In a team of 3,000 people, it still has a big impact, by the way, and it's less visible, so it's harder to spot.
Yeah.
But has less of an impact on the business. So your culture is almost easy to oversee and view and monitor and manage in a smaller organization. But the impact of that not being right is greater. Strategically, it's easier in a big organization because you have more resources. You can run 4 or 5 different service or product initiatives. You screw 2 of them up, you've still got 3 of them, and you're going to be okay, right? Providing they've got the right opportunity upside commercially. Whereas if you're a small business and you're bootstrapping one particular initiative, you need it to work. And the mindset around that is we cannot fail often is an unhelpful one. And so, again, the conditions are the conditions, and there's pluses and minuses to both. The most important thing is understanding what they are.
Okay.
And then managing them, I would say. Right. If you're a small business, you want more resources. And if you're a big business, you want to be more agile and nimble, I suppose. But you can't have both.
Right. So, interesting that from your perspective, it's not big is better or small is better. It's just that you've got to understand the pluses and minuses of your particular environment and build the planet around those.
Yeah.
But you can, what I'm hearing is, you can do it in a larger organization and still have a thriving, embedded, valuable culture that helps people perform, and size is not a limitation to it. But I suspect the thing you have to do is put that effort in that we talked about earlier, constantly.
Yeah. And you take it from your own experiences, right? It's easy for you to communicate with all of your staff in a smaller business. In thousands of staff, and sometimes this is to my day. I have a thing where in previous companies I've sent the boss or the leader an email and heard nothing. And how that made me feel as an employee was dreadful, right? I felt like I didn't matter, or my opinion didn't matter. Even though I know that person's busy, I've responded in 10 years to every email that someone has ever sent me in my organization that warranted a response or an answer, because it's really, really important for me that they don't get the experience that I had, and I do care what they think, because I am, however you want to put it, I'm further away from the customer, and we do everything we can, empower organizations, put decisions closest to the customer as possible, all of that stuff. I'm still further away, and I don't ever want to be in a tower away from where it actually is, because I just become disintermediated with what the business is really about. And it's like, in the supermarket world, you got to walk the shop floor and find as many ways to expose yourself to the challenges on the ground, because they're the ones that really matter.
And also you become disconnected with your own culture because you're sitting somewhere you're too far away from it.
Exactly.
If you're not doing that,
and it's hard to do, because the bigger the organisation, it's a bit like I used to say it's a bit like being the Queen. Everywhere you go, you smell fresh paint. You travel around the world, and everyone's on show for 3 days, and they put their best self out, and you leave, and they go, oh god, I can go back to how I was.
Conversation with a set of leaders yesterday.
And it's. You want people to be real with you, and you've got to create the environment where people want to tell you what they really feel. Again, sometimes you may not think that's right, or it's hard to accept, but the fact that they've said it means you can do something about it. You can either acknowledge it and go and do something about it, or you can communicate and say, well, I'm not sure what you're saying there is totally right in my point of view, but here's my, you
can't respond to it in any meaningful way unless you know what it is.
Exactly. And it's a bit like going to a restaurant, isn't it? You have a terrible meal and you think, oh my God, it's terrible. You pay the bill, you don't give a tip, you walk out, and you're never going to go back in. But if you say, that was a little bit overcooked, or this wasn't good, or I've waited 45 minutes for my bill at the end, I'm really sorry, here's a free bottle of wine, or whatever it is, they've got the opportunity to do something about it.
Yes.
And you've got to create the opportunity for that feedback with your customers and your team. It's the most important thing.
And that comes back to that feeling safe and having trust. and part of that is again about what you're signing up for, and we've all signed up for the same thing. So a couple of things just as we wrap up for me. We've talked about a lot of the upsides of all of this. In maintaining, sustaining, nurturing, protecting the culture and the planet that you've built, are there any sacrifices that you have to make for that? Is there anything that you know, or have there been sacrifices that you say, actually, we're going to take a bit of a hit because otherwise our planetary system is going to be damaged here?
Absolutely. You have to. There are occasions where, and it comes back to your values, behaviors, or non-negotiables. You can't ever break those. Soon as anybody sees that your culture is for sale, you're in big trouble.
So that sounds like sometimes you might have to leave money on the table.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Sometimes you might have to get punished for them commercially.
Yeah. So we have a particular business, and I won't go into detail, and we report particular data sets, and there's been a couple of occasions where customers have been really, really awful to the analysts and editors that create that content. They're no longer our customers, and I send them a very polite letter to say that's not acceptable. Right? I don't want my team to be exposed to that type of, and in one instance it was racist, right? Because they're paying us money, it doesn't give them the right. We can choose who we do business with, and that's important.
And that sends a massive message to the people that you lead, that even though they're customers, they can't buy our behaviours. They can't buy our culture.
No, and it sets the standards for the people in the team, right, of what's acceptable, and that they're supported in the culture that
and helps
we
them
wish
feel
to
brave,
create.
like we spoke about before.
Absolutely. Nobody should be subjective to that. Again, it comes back to, we can create the world we want to see in our walls because we're in control of that, but we all have a responsibility and an obligation to do it. It's not just on Dean the leader or anybody else, it's about all of us together.
And finally, what gives you confidence that beyond your tenure, that the planet that you've helped create within your business is going to not be the same, but is going to sustain and thrive when, in many, many years to come, when you're not there? What gives you confidence that's inbuilt, it's in the DNA of your organization, and is not just sitting with you or one or a few small number of leaders?
Because we believe the same thing, and that's not an accident, right?
Okay.
So because we share the same purpose, values, and how of doing things. Companies, people can copy our products and they can copy, but they can't copy how we do it.
They can't copy who you are.
No, and not just me. Who
you are as an organisation.
Exactly. Yeah. And so, and I've given a lot of thought about this. I was always the kind of young gun leader, and now I'm feeling not. How would I judge my own success? And it's not money or even results, but it is about, one day if I'm sat there and I see people that I've worked with for achieving amazing things and blazing the trail, and it's not standing on my shoulders, that's when I know I've done a good job. And we've spoke about this I think once before, but for health, all being well, I don't think want to retire, because I've worked with so many exceptional people, and I've been truly blessed that I have an obligation to share some of those lessons and messages on other people. And as the kind of backstreet Essex boy that I've had a lot of people help me because they want to help me, and I want to help others.
And by doing that, you fulfill that value in yourself, but you also create a sustainable legacy because you are influencing and changing the lives and worlds of the people that you lead. And it sounds as though that we come back to some of the stuff we spoke about before, which is know what you're signing up for, be really clear what your values are, and reinforce them every day, where you catch people doing stuff right, but also not walking past broken windows, and be clear that this is a leadership expectation, and it's not always going to be easy.
Yeah.
But it is really important because of the long-term impact it will have, and not only for the kind of commercial bit of the business and the line on the P&L, but for people's own mental health, their physical well-being, all of that. Spend a lot of time work, and if it's in a planet where you can thrive, then that, we going back to business being force for good. That feels like that's a really important element of building any planet.
Agreed. And that starts with everybody, including everybody on the planet, knowing that they matter and they do make a difference.
Dean, thank you. That has been just the best time. I hope you've enjoyed it.
I have, thank you.
And I have learnt a lot. Thank you.
Okay.